how does a 24-year-old pianist escape to a barren island just to cure his hay fever and then somehow accidentally invent the mathematical foundation of modern quantum mechanics?
Right. I mean, it honestly sounds like the inciting incident of some strange science fiction novel.
Yeah, totally.
But the mystery actually deepens when you trace the rest of his trajectory,
Right.
because you then have to figure out how that exact same brilliant mind ends up, just a couple of decades later, leading the nuclear weapons program for the Nazi regime,
Wow.
only to completely fail at building the atomic bomb.
See, for a lot of people listening to this deep dive right now, the name Heisenberg probably just brings to mind, Walter White's alter ego in Breaking Bad.
Oh, for sure. The black hat and everything.
Exactly. But the actual Werner Heisenberg lived a life that is this profound story of, well, world-altering genius, intense political compromise, and deeply unresolved historical mysteries.
We are looking at a man who completely rewrote the laws of reality, survived some truly terrifying encounters with the SS, and this is wild, whose raw, unfiltered reactions to the Hiroshima bombing were actually captured on secret British intelligence recordings.
Okay, let's unpack the contradictions of his early life, because trying to pin down Heisenberg's true character is, it's honestly a bit like trying to pin down a quantum particle using his own uncertainty principle.
That is a very apt comparison.
Right. The closer you look at his scientific genius, the blurrier his moral compass seems to become.
Yeah, and to understand how he could tear down the established laws of physics, we really need to look at the philosophy-drenched environment that shaped him. I mean, he wasn't just raised in a laboratory.
Right, he was born in 1901 in Würzburg, Germany, right?
Yes, and his father was Germany's only full professor of medieval and modern Greek.
So that classical influence permeated his whole worldview. Like, he wasn't just a numbers guy, he was an accomplished classical pianist. And in his late teens, he was reading Plato's Timaeus in the original Greek while, hiking in the Bavarian Alps.
Which is just such a specific image.
Yeah.
And he later explicitly credited his scientific mindset to studying Plato. He adopted this fundamentally Platonic idea that the smallest units of matter were not physical objects in the ordinary sense.
They weren't like tiny billiard balls bouncing around.
Right. They were mathematical forms. They were ideas.
It's a fascinating intellectual foundation, but it's happening while Germany is practically tearing itself apart, because in 1919, the country is in total turmoil following the First World War.
Yeah, total chaos.
And Heisenberg actually participated in the Freikorps, these right-wing paramilitary groups, to fight the Bavarian Soviet Republic.
Which was a violent, intensely volatile period. I mean, people were literally fighting in the streets.
But the thing is, decades later, his recollection of that time is shockingly light. He casually remembered those days as, quote, youthful fun.
Youthful fun.
Yeah. He compared it to playing cops and robbers, saying his duties were mostly just seizing bicycles and typewriters and guarding prisoners.
Oh.
There's this bizarre detachment from the physical, political reality around him.
And, that detachment is a thread we will see pull throughout his entire life. But in the realm of theoretical physics, that ability to step away from the physical, tangible world is precisely what led to his massive breakthrough in 1925.
Which brings us to the famous pollen cure.
Yes, the pollen cure.
So in 1925, Heisenberg is suffering from an unbelievably severe bout of hay fever. His face is swollen, he can barely see.
It's just miserable.
And the standard treatments at the time, which apparently included aspirin and cocaine, were doing absolutely nothing for him.
Cocaine for allergies. The 1920s were a wild time.
Right. So he retreats to Helgoland, which is this rocky, completely barren, pollen-free island in the North Sea.
He is completely isolated. And it is there that he develops his famous Umbentung paper, which translates roughly to reinterpretation.
Okay, reinterpretation of what exactly?
Well, at the time, physics was stuck. The old models pictured electrons orbiting the nucleus like planets around the sun. But the math just wasn't working when they tried to predict the light these atoms emitted.
So the model was basically broken.
Exactly. And Heisenberg, deeply influenced by his philosophical background, decided to just abandon the idea of visualizing the atom altogether.
He essentially said, stop trying to draw a picture of it.
Yes. He argued that science should only deal with what can actually be observed in a laboratory. You can't see an electron's orbit. You can only see the frequencies of light it emits when it jumps from one state to another.
Right, you just see the results.
Exactly. So to track this, he realized he didn't need to know where the electron was at any given moment. He only needed to track the relationship between its starting point and its ending point.
And tracking those relationships requires a completely different kind of math. Because if you're looking at jumps between, say, 4 different energy levels, you have to map every possible combination of a jump from level 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 2 to 4, and so on.
Which creates a massive grid of numbers.
Right, which in mathematics is called a matrix. So he created a way to calculate quantum behavior using arrays of numbers. But the wildest part is that Heisenberg didn't actually know the formal mathematics of matrices at the time.
He just figured it out as he went.
Yeah, he composed a revolutionary symphony entirely by ear without even knowing how to read the sheet music. He just intuitively felt the math.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
He gave his paper to his mentor, Max Born, and Born actually had the mathematical background to recognize it. Born realized this strange trick Heisenberg invented was matrix algebra.
So Born had to step in.
Yeah, Born and another physicist, Pascual Jordan, had to help Heisenberg translate his intuitive philosophical ideas into a rigorous, systematic mathematical language.
And because he was willing to abandon physical models for pure, abstract math, he inevitably arrived at a mathematical limit to what humans could actually know.
Which is a huge leap.
It really is. And that leap in logic directly paved the way for his most famous contribution in 1927, working alongside Niels Bohr in Copenhagen.
The uncertainty principle.
Yes. And a really crucial detail here is that in his original paper, he didn't actually use the German word for uncertainty. He used Ungenauigkeit, which translates more closely to imprecision.
And that distinction really changes how we understand the concept. The principle states that you cannot simultaneously know both the exact position and the exact momentum of a particle.
Okay.
The more precisely you measure where a particle is, the less you can know about where it's going, and vice versa.
Okay, I want to push back on this a little bit for our listeners because it sounds incredibly frustrating. I mean, isn't saying we can't know reality just a convenient excuse for physicists who have hit a technological wall?
That's a very common reaction.
Right, like why should we accept that the universe is inherently blurry just because our microscopes in the 1920s weren't good enough?
Well, Albert Einstein made that exact same argument. He believed it was a temporary failure of measurement. But Heisenberg proved mathematically that this is not a technological limit. It is a fundamental law of nature.
Okay, so how does that actually work?
Think of it like taking a photograph of a speeding bullet.
Yeah.
If you use an incredibly fast shutter speed, you get a crisp image of exactly where the bullet is.
Right, frozen in midair.
Exactly. But you lose all the motion blur, which means the photograph tells you nothing about how fast it's traveling.
Yeah.
Now, if you leave the shutter open, you get a long streak that shows its trajectory and speed, but you no longer know its exact position at any single microsecond.
Oh, okay. But in photography, that's a limitation of the camera.
Yes, but in quantum mechanics, the math dictates that the particle literally does not possess a definite position and momentum at the same time until it interacts with something.
The philosophical fallout from this must have been seismic.
Oh, it was. Heisenberg became a fierce anti-realist. He argued that science no longer confronts nature as an objective observer. The very act of observing alters the object.
Wow.
As he put it, we don't observe nature itself, we observe our relationship with nature.
Which Einstein just completely detested. I mean, Einstein was a staunch realist who believed particles had an objectively true state at all times, whether we were looking or not. He famously rejected the idea that the universe is fundamentally indeterminate.
A universe without a definitive state was philosophically terrifying to Einstein. But you have to remember, in 1930s Germany, that kind of abstract relativistic thinking went from being a scientific debate to becoming a literal crime.
Right, because the political certainty of Germany was rapidly collapsing into fascism. And following the rise of the National Socialist regime, a movement emerged known as Deutsche Physik, or Aryan physics.
Yes. This movement was led by 2 Nobel laureates, Philipp Lenard and Johannes Stark, and they launched vicious, coordinated attacks against leading theoretical physicists.
What was their main issue with it?
They viewed quantum mechanics and relativity as overly abstract, mathematically convoluted, and just entirely incompatible with their highly rigid, objective ideological views on science.
And because Heisenberg was the most prominent defender of these theories, still living in Germany, since Einstein had already fled, he became their primary target.
It was a terrifying atmosphere for academics. Colleagues were disappearing.
Yeah, and Heisenberg was attacked directly in an SS newspaper as a white Jew. The article basically accused him of being an Aryan who acted like a Jew, stating quite clearly that he should be made to disappear.
In that era, under that regime, an attack in a paper headed by Heinrich Himmler was effectively a death sentence.
But Heisenberg didn't flee. He chose to fight back to clear his name and regain his honor. He actually wrote a direct letter to Himmler demanding to be exonerated, which triggered a grueling year-long investigation by the SS.
And he's being interrogated by Johannes Chilfs, an SS investigator. His life is hanging by a thread.
And the way this gets resolved, it feels like an absurd dark comedy. The architect of quantum mechanics is ultimately saved from the SS because of a mom's hiking club.
Yeah, the contrast between the stakes and the resolution is just staggering.
So how did that happen?
Well, Heisenberg's mother lived in Munich, and she decided to visit Heinrich Himmler's mother.
Just knocked on her door.
Basically.
Yeah.
It turned out that Heisenberg's maternal grandfather and Himmler's father knew each other well. They were both rectors, and they were members of the exact same Bavarian hiking club.
So these two mothers sit down, essentially leverage a hiking club connection, and suddenly the most terrifying paramilitary organization in Europe just backs off.
Following that mother-to-mother meeting, Himmler officially cleared Heisenberg. And ironically, the SS investigator, Julfs, actually ended up supporting Heisenberg's science.
Wow, talk about a twist.
Yeah. Himmler sent a letter telling Heisenberg he was too valuable to the state to lose, but he included a very sharp warning. Keep your scientific results entirely separate from your personal and political attitudes.
Basically, keep your head down, do the math, and don't talk politics.
Precisely.
So having survived this ideological purge, Heisenberg is now the state's top physicist. And when World War II breaks out, the regime immediately demands a superweapon.
Right. The German nuclear weapons program, the Uranverein or Uranium Club, is formed in September 1939. Heisenberg becomes a principal scientist and eventually heads the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physics.
This era right here is the crucible of his controversial legacy. Because in June 1942, Heisenberg is summoned to report to Albert Speer, the Minister of Armaments, and Speer asks him directly if they can build an atomic bomb.
And Heisenberg told Speer that a bomb could not be built before 1945. He laid out the immense monetary resources, the industrial infrastructure, and the enormous number of personnel required.
Resources that Germany just didn't have.
Exactly. Stretched thin by a multi-front war, they simply could not spare it.
So based on that assessment, the military downgrades the project. They pivot the focus toward nuclear power production instead of a bomb. But the Allies, they had no idea this pivot occurred.
None at all. They're terrified.
They thought Heisenberg was on the verge of handing a nuclear weapon to the regime. So in 1944, a U.S. OSS agent named Moberg attended a lecture Heisenberg gave in neutral Switzerland.
Berg was an interesting character.
Yeah, and he was carrying a pistol with direct orders to assassinate Heisenberg right there in the lecture hall if he indicated Germany was close to a bomb.
But Berg judged that Heisenberg's talk didn't reveal any imminent threat, so he didn't pull the trigger. But the Allies weren't taking any chances. As the war was collapsing in 1945, they launched Operation Molsus to sweep through Europe and capture the top German atomic scientists.
So they grab Heisenberg and 9 other prominent scientists and lock them in a British safe house called Farm Hall.
Right.
And every room is secretly bugged. The British intelligence services are recording every single conversation these scientists have with each other when they think no one is listening.
The transcripts from Farm Hall are some of the most revealing documents in the history of science. Because on August 6, 1945, the scientists hear the media reports that the U.S. has dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima.
And their first reaction is absolute disbelief. They literally do not believe the Americans are capable of it.
They thought it was a bluff. When it sinks in that it's real, Heisenberg tries to reverse engineer the physics on the spot.
Just right there in the safe house.
Yes. He attempts to calculate the critical mass needed for the U.S. bomb. But the transcripts show he makes massive fundamental errors in his calculation.
Okay, you have to explain how a Nobel-winning physicist gets the math wrong on the most important scientific development of his lifetime.
It's wild, but he modeled the atomic bomb as if it were a nuclear reactor. He treated the neutron scattering as a simple random walk, like a drunk person stumbling around a room, occasionally bumping into an atom.
Oh, wow.
He didn't calculate it as an explosive exponential chain reaction. And because of that error, he estimated they would need literal tons of uranium-235 to make a bomb, rather than the few kilograms the Americans actually used.
That is a huge miscalculation. And years later, physicists like Edward Teller and Hans Bethe looked at those transcripts and pointed out that Heisenberg made the exact same kind of beginner errors they had made when they first started thinking about a bomb years earlier.
It showed he simply hadn't done the deep work.
Right. And when Heisenberg discussed the German failure on the tapes, he claimed he only ever wanted to build a reactor for energy. He famously stated that they wouldn't have had the moral courage to recommend to the government in the spring of 1942 that they employ 120,000 men to build a weapon.
Which introduces a massive psychological mystery.
Exactly. Was his failure to calculate the critical mass a deliberate subconscious blind spot? Like, did he sabotage the program through calculated inaction and bad math because he didn't want the regime to have the bomb? Or is it possible that the great genius simply failed at the physics when it mattered most?
Well, a German physicist named Manfred Popp thoroughly analyzed the transcripts and the program's documentation.
And what did he find?
He concluded that Heisenberg genuinely didn't spend time working out the mechanics of a nuclear weapon during the war. He actively avoided even thinking about it deeply enough to get the math right.
But whether that was a moral choice or just scientific hubris is, the defining debate of his life.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with the war over, the atomic age is dominated by the Americans. And the man who stayed behind now has to navigate a shattered country and his own incredibly heavy legacy.
Right, because after his release from Farm Hall, he settled in the British zone of occupied Germany. And he was actually heavily recruited by the very countries he was just at war with. He received highly lucrative offers to move to the United States.
Which he turned down.
Yeah, he turned them down with a pretty dark sense of humor, actually. In 1951, he responded to an offer from Yale by joking that he would only come to America if World War III broke out and the Soviet Union occupied his town.
That's bleak. But he felt a duty to rebuild German science from the ashes. He became instrumental in establishing the Max Planck Society, served as its director of physics, and really returned to the international stage.
Yeah, in 1953, he signed the convention that created CERN on behalf of West Germany.
Professionally, he became an elder statesman of science. But politically, the debate over his wartime role raged on.
It did. His wife later published a book vehemently defending him, titling it The Political Life of an Apolitical Person. She painted him as a brilliant mind who only engaged with the regime to protect German physics.
But the historical record shows a much more tangled reality. I mean, he never participated in explicit party propaganda, but several colleagues reported that he expressed support for German imperialist ideas.
Like what?
Well, the Dutch physicist Hendrik Casimir recalled a conversation in 1943 where Heisenberg argued that German world domination was a historical necessity compared to the alternative of Soviet communism.
Yikes. And there are other chilling quotes, too. Rudolf Peierls noted that Heisenberg told a colleague the Nazis would become, quote, quite decent after 50 years in power.
Right. And Lise Meitner recalled him rationalizing atrocities by saying, every spiritual upheaval has always been accompanied by great cruelty.
Those rationalizations reveal a man who is just desperate to compartmentalize. Heisenberg believed deeply that knowledge was most valuable when it was understood and applied. Yet he spent the entire latter half of his life trying to distance himself from the ultimate devastating application of the physics he helped create.
It's a profound contradiction.
It asks a tough question of all of us. Can a person who heads a state nuclear program during a global war truly claim to be apolitical? Where is the line between surviving a tyrannical regime and providing the intellectual cover that enables it?
In his later years, as he wrestled with those exact questions, he leaned heavily back into the philosophy and religion of his youth. He remained a devout Christian, viewing physics as a reflection of divine creation.
He actually referred to nature as God's second book, right alongside the Bible.
Yes, and in a really poetic return to his old debates with Einstein over the uncertainty principle, Heisenberg wrote in his final letter to Einstein, "We can console ourselves that the good Lord God would know the position of the particles."
Wow. Even at the end of his life, he returned to that fundamental mystery of what we can and cannot know. Heisenberg died in 1976 of kidney cancer. His colleagues walked to his home and quietly lit a candle in front of his door.
It's an incredibly quiet end to a life that generated so much noise.
It really is.
Werner Heisenberg gave humanity a profound new lens through which to understand the universe.
Yeah.
He proved mathematically that we cannot know everything with absolute certainty, and in doing so, he fundamentally shifted our grasp of reality.
But while his scientific legacy is etched into the foundation of modern physics, his moral legacy remains entirely blurry, which leaves you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. Heisenberg proved that the mere act of observing a quantum particle fundamentally changes its reality. You cannot separate the observer from the object.
That's the core of it, right?
Exactly. And looking back at his life, perhaps we have to accept a kind of historical uncertainty principle. When you observe a brilliant scientist working under a tyrannical regime, Your own moral perspective, your own active observation inevitably changes the legacy of the man you're looking at. Keep questioning the certainties in your own world,